Biruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem to get on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Beis, starting with the new Mishnah on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph. The two Mishnayos before we're speaking about when a person shechs the Korban Pesach with machshavos she'einam ru'uyos. Our Mishnah begins by speaking about a person who shechs the Korban Pesach while he still has chametz in his possession. Says the Mishnah, Hashoichet es haPesach ala chametz oiver b'lo saseh. If a person has chametz in his possession, he shechs the Korban Pesach, he's over alav. The pasuk in the Torah says, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. However, although he's over an Isser min Torah, it does not poisel the carbon. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, af hatami. Not only is he going to be chayiv if he has chametz in his possession while shechting the Korban Pesach, but even when he shechts the Korban Tamid shel bein ha'arboim on Yudalid ben Nisan, he will also be chayiv. Rabbi Shimon Oimer, haPesach be'arbosar lishmoi chayiv v'shelo lishmo poter. The Korban Pesach on Yudalid during its designated time, if he has kavanah for the shem Korban Pesach, then he will be chayiv when he has chametz in his possession. However, if it's shaloi lishmoi for a different type of carbon, then he will not be chayiv because the shchita she'eina ru'uya lo shmei shchita. Ushar kol azvachim bein lishmon bein shelo lishmon poter. And all other korbanos, whether it's the sake of the Korban Pesach or the sake of a different carbon, nonetheless it'll be poter because it's during the time of the designated time for the Korban Pesach. The Gemara will explain this reason. Rabbi Shimon goes on to say, Uva moyed, however, during Chol HaMoed, when it's not the time of the Korban Pesach to be brought, then if it's lishmoi poter, shelo lishmo chayev. If it's l'shem Korban Pesach, then it's poter, because again, it's not during this designated time. However, if it's for the sake of a shlomim, then it will be chayiv because it's a valid carbon. Ushar kol azvachim bein lishmon bein shelo lishmon chayiv. All other karbonos, again during the moed, whether it's lishmo or shelo lishmo, is going to be chayiv because that is still going to be a valid carbon. It could be that the bailim, it will be that the bailim will not mekayim his chayiv with that, but it doesn't poisel the carbon. Chutz min achatas. Sheshachtu shelo lishma. If he shechs the carbon chadash shelo lishma, then it'll poisel the carbon, and therefore he will not be chayiv. So it comes out that there are three different opinions in our Mishnah. The first opinion, the opinion of the Tana Kama, says that when a person shechs the Korban Pesach, when he has chametz in his rishus, he's going to be chayiv. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's also including when he shechs the Korban Tamid shel bein ha'arboim. And Rabbi Shimon is moisif that if it's going to be during the moyed, all karbonos, with the exception of korban chatos, if he has chametz in his possession, he'll be also chayiv. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, La'olam einoi chayov ad sheyecha chametz l'shoichet or l'zorek. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish begins by saying, if the shoichet has chametz in his possession, or the zorek, he zorek the dam, he will also then be chayiv. We're on Samach Gimel Amud Beis at the top. Or one of the bnei chabura who has chametz in his possession, providing that is in with him in the azara. So Reish Lakish says to us over here that, according to Rashi, that if the shoichet or the zorek or the one of bnei chabura have chametz in his possession, then they're all going to be chayiv. Tosfos says only the shoichet or the zorek will be chayiv. But if one of the bnei chabura have chametz in possession, they will not be chayiv. Only the shoichet or the zorek will be chayiv. Al kol panim, that sheet is Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Omar afal pi she'ein imoy ba'azara. Rabbi Yochanan says, I agree with you with the first things that you said, that if the shoichet or the zorek or one of the bnei chabura have chametz in his possession. However, I disagree that it has to be that the chametz be in the azara with him. Even if it's not in the azara, is at his house. That itself will also make him liable for this lav. Ask the Gemara, what is the machlokes in Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? Says the Gemara, Ilema be'al b'samuch kemiflagi. When it says, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, when it says the word al, it means b'samech. It's a machlokes if it's b'samuch or not. It means nearby. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish sovar al b'samuch. Rabbi Yochanan sovar lo ba'inin al b'samuch. And that's the machlokes. Ask the Gemara, that's not mistabir. V'ha if leguba chadezimna. They already argue about this nekuda somewhere else. Gabe carbon toida. The carbon toida is a carbon that's brought with lachamim, 40 loaves of bread. So the first stage is that one sanctifies the loaves of bread for the carbon toida, which means that it has a sanctity of a kedushas hadamim. That kedushas damim, if those loaves of bread become nitma, then they can go ahead and be poided them. Once the carbon toida is brought, then those loaves of bread get a higher sanctification of a kedushas haguf, whereby it becomes tameh. Then you have to be saref those lechamim. So the Mishnah says like this: Disnan hashoichet toida lifnim, one who shechs a carbon toida inside, in the proper place. However, the lechem is outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Loi kodash halechem. So he shechs the carbon toida, and that is in the Azara. He then, however, has the lechem of the carbon toida outside of the walls of Yerushalayim. So it states over here, Loi kodash halechem. The lechem does not get the higher sanctity of kedushas haguf. My chutz lechayma. Ask the Gemara, when the Mishnah says it's outside the chayma, what does it mean that the breads are outside the chayma? Rabbi Yochanan Omar chutz lechayma as beis pagi. It's outside the outer wall of Yerushalayim. Aval chutz lechayma as ha'azara kadish v'loy ba'inin al besamuch. That although the pasuk in regards to the carbon toida says al zevach toida shlamav, it does not require to be nearby, and therefore it's only going to be poised if it's outside the walls of Yerushalayim. But it's within the walls of Yerushalayim, even if it's outside the wall of the Azara, it's still valid. And we get the Kedushas Haguf. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omar Afilu Chutz L'choimas Azara Loi Kaddish. Whereas Rabbi Lakish says it's not going to get the Kedushas Haguf, even if it's outside the Azara. Alma Ba'inan Al Besamuch. So therefore we see that Reish Lakish does require Al to mean that it's nearby within the Azara itself. So it's not mistaber that's machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is the same machlokes over here. Therefore, the Gemara suggests Elo behasros safek kamifluki. They're arguing about when there's a hasros safek. Now, every time a person transgresses in aver that he's going to be punished for, bidei adam, then he has to have hasra. And therefore, if a person is about to put on a garment of shatnez, wool and linen together, he has to have a warning by two witnesses saying that if he's going to put on this garment, then he's going to be over the lav v'shatnez, he'll get chayiv malchus. And he says, afal pikain, and he goes out and he puts on that garment, they can bring him into Bezdin and then administer lashes. That's only because there's a hasra vadai. What about when there's a hasra safek? The Gemara suggests that's the machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. That means to say that if the person is warned when he's shechting the carbon Pesach, and he has chametz that we see in his possession there in the Azara, so then that's a hasra vadai. But what happens if we don't know whether he has chametz in his possession? Maybe it's in his house. When you give him hasra, it's a hasra safek. On that, Reish Lakish says it's no good, and Reish Yochanan said hasra safek is valid. Says the Gemara, the itmar shvua she'oichel kikar zu. The Gemara asks that can't be the machlokes because behonami hapligi b'chadezimna, because Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan argued about this nekud v'asra safek in another time, as the Gemara explains now, and there was not mistaber to say the same exact machlokes is now over here as well. The itmar shvua she'oichel kikar zu hayoim. A person makes a shvua, he's going to eat this loaf of bread today. Ve'ovar yom v'loy ochlo, and the day passed and he did not eat the bread. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish the Amrei Travayu Einoi Loike. They both say he doesn't get malchus, but for a different reason. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Eino Loike Mishum Dahavele Lav She'ein Boy Maisa. V'chol Lav She'ein Boy Maisa Ein Loikin Alav. Because he transgressed a lav that does not carry, that's not within a maisa. And it was an inactive thing that he did. He just did not eat that which he made a shvur that he will eat. So then he doesn't get malchus for that reason, because lav she'ein boy maisa. A person, only if he does a lav she'yesh boy malchus, gets malchus. Aval, yesh boy maisa gets malchus. Aval, hasra, safek shma hasra. But Rabbi Yochanan goes on to say, but in terms of the hasra itself, although it's hasra safek, we don't know whether he will then finish the day with not eating the bread or not. That's still going to be a valid hasra, says Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish Omar Einoi Loike Mishum Dahavele Hasra Safek VaHasra Safek Loishma Hasra Aval Lav Shein Bo Maisa Loikin Alav. Whereas Reish Lakish argument says the reason why he doesn't get malchus over here is because of the Hasra Safek, and Hasra Safek he doesn't get malchus for. Gabe the Hasra, Gabe the Lav She'ein Bo Malchus, that he would get malchus for. So Al Kapanim we see that this is the machlekes between them, that Hasra Safek Shmo Hasra or not. Amrei, therefore the Gemara says, you're right, we can't be saying that this is the machlokes over here. So Gemara now goes back to the original suggestion. La'olam be'al samuch kamifli. Really they are arguing about how they use the word al. Does it mean samuch or not? Again, Reish Lakish says it does mean samuch, and therefore it has to be that the chametz is present in the azara. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says al does not have to require samuch, nearness. Vitzricha, now the Gemara proves that although they argue about that in the area of Korban Todah, that we also need that machlokes over here by Korban Pesach. V'tzricha di ifligu le'inin chametz. If they're only arguing by us in regards to chametz, hava amina be'ahu hu deka amar Rabbi Yochanan delo ba'in al besamuch. That's where Rabbi Yochanan says you don't need al to teach me besamuch mishum di iser hu v'kol hecha di isei. Because it's an iser that is over, and therefore wherever it is, it will be. Aval le'inyan mikdash lechem, le'inyan mekadesh lechem, loy kadesh ele bifnim. Emo model Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish deba'ina al basamuch. Di isei gavoy kadesh, loy kadesh. Mi dehave akli shores. But he says when it comes to the lechem of the Korban Todah, there it has to be within the azara, just like a kli shores. In order for it to mekadesh the object within its kli, it has to be that the kli sharas is in the azara. So too, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan would agree that over here, since the lachamim, the korban toida, for it to become kodesh, sanctified, of kedushas haguf, it also has to be within the azara. Says the Gemara, that's tzricha, and therefore we need it. V'yashmin, okay, so then just teach the case that they're arguing about in the case of the lechem of the korban toida. V'yashmin le'ina mikadesh lechem. If I only taught that, however, hava amina behachkom Rabbi Shimon Lakish deba'ina al besamuch. That's where Rabbi Shimon Lakish requires besamuch. The i'ise gavoy kodesh ilo kodesh. Because then, only if it's within the azara, then does the lechem become kodesh. Aval le'inyin chametz moide l'Rabbi Yochanan lo ba'inan al besamuch di isurahu v'kol hecha di isei. And therefore, however, he would say when it comes to the case of Korban Pesach, there, even if the chametz resides in his house outside of the azara, he would agree with Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because he's over a lav, and wherever the chametz might be, it will be. And therefore be chayiv. And therefore, tzricha, we need both cases. The case of the Korban Todah, as well as the case of Korban Pesach, to show the machlokes in Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan that each one maintains his position. The Gemara goes on to ask, Boy minei Rav Oshaya Rabbi Ami. Now Rav Oshaya asked Rabbi Ami that which we saw Reish Lakish and even Rabbi Yochanan is moided to. But he asked Rabbi Ami the following question. Let's say the shaychet himself does not have chametz in his possession, but one of the bnei chabur does have chametz. Is he going to be chayiv or not? We explained, according to Rashi, that'll mechayiv everybody. According to Tosfos, it'll mechayiv the shoichet. The question is, does that mechayiv the shoichet or everybody else when it comes to somebody with a bnei chabura who has chametz in his possession? Omar lei, he answered him, Miksiv lo tishchat al chametzcha. Does it say in the pasuk lo tishchat al your chametz? No, lo tishchat al chametz kisiv. In general, chametz. Omar lei. So then he says back to him, Ihachi, if that's true, then afilu leechad besoif ha'olam nami. Even somebody else who comes and he has chametz over here, let's say in the azara, then the sheikhah will also be chayiv. Is that so? Omar lei. Rav Ami answered him, Omar kro lo tishchat v'lo yolin. It says in the pasuk, it begins by saying lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi, and then it goes to say v'lo yolin la boike zevach chag haPesach. So there's a smichus. We learn a hekish lo tishchat al chametz hanoch dekaimi aleh mishum lo yolin. Those who are included in the lav, namely the bnei chabura, those who are counted to be part of the chabura, who are going to be over the lav if they leave over the meat until the morning, those are the ones who then going to then be mechayiv for a person who shechs the Karban Pesach when they have chametz in their possession. But somebody else who is not his korban, he wasn't part of the chabura, even if he has chametz in his possession, you're certainly not going to be chayiv al lo tishchat al chametz dam zivichi.